Sometimes life stores everything until all you have left is $20 and a choice. For Claire Morgan, that choice came on a gray October evening in Portland, Maine, at a county carnival she had no business attending. The kind of place where families walked hand in hand past booths selling cotton candy and raffle tickets, their laughter cutting through the autumn chill like knives. Claire stood beside her truck, a battered Ford F-150 with 200,000 miles and a cracked windshield, and watched those families like a ghost observing the living. 50 years old, no business, no apartment, no daughter waiting for her on Friday nights, just the truck, a gym membership for showers, and a savings account that had bled down to $3,000 after paying off what she could of the debts. The furniture restoration shop she'd built over 20 years had closed its doors in April. By June, she'd lost the apartment above the bakery. By September, the judge had adjusted custody arrangements with the kind of clinical efficiency that felt like a scalpel to the chest. David, her ex-husband, had remarried 2 years prior to Sarah, a software engineer who made good money and owned a house in a neighborhood with actual sidewalks. They had stability. They had a guest bedroom. They had everything Claire used to have before the economy decided small businesses were expendable. The carnival fundraiser sprawled across the parking lot like something from another lifetime. Claire had stopped for gas, nothing more. But the woman at the raffle booth caught her eye as she walked back toward the truck. White hair, kind face, the sort of grandmother who probably baked cookies for church functions. One more chance, honey. $20 could change everything. Claire almost kept walking. $20 was food for 3 days if she stretched it. But something in the woman's cheerful persistence, or maybe just the crushing loneliness of having spoken to no one all day, made her stop. She pulled the last crumpled bill from her wallet and handed it over, watching the woman's face light up like she'd done something noble instead of desperate. The ticket felt weightless in her palm. The woman promised the drawing would happen at 8. Claire didn't stay. She drove to the far edge of the lot and sat in the truck bed as the sun went down, watching families drift past with their prizes and their intact lives. Her phone buzzed at 8:15. Unknown number. Is this Claire Morgan? This is Margaret from the fire department raffle. Congratulations. You've won our grand prize. Claire actually laughed. The sound came out harsh and bitter in the empty parking lot. A gift basket, maybe. Gas cards if she was lucky. It's a house. The woman's voice brightened with enthusiasm. A historic property donation. Stone cabin up in West Virginia. Kanawha State Forest region. The previous owner, with no heirs, left it to the Historical Society. They donated it for our fundraiser. You'll need to cover transfer fees and taxes, but the deed is yours. The words didn't make sense at first. Claire sat in the truck bed, phone pressed to her ear, trying to process what this stranger was telling her. West Virginia, a house, an actual house, one with her last $20 like some cosmic joke. The documents arrived 3 days later via courier. Official letterhead, legal seals, a surveyor's description that read like something from a century ago. The property was called Thornwood Cabin, 2 acres in Kanawha State Forest, 15 miles from a village named Hollow Creek. Previous owner, Muriel Dawson, age 93, died with no direct descendants. The Historical Society had tried to sell it, found no buyers, eventually donated it for the tax write-off. The photographs made Claire's stomach drop. Stone foundation and log walls, half swallowed by forest. The roof had caved in on one side. Windows gaped empty. Ivy crawled across everything like the mountain was slowly digesting the structure. The whole thing leaned slightly, as if exhausted by the effort of remaining upright. Claire spread the papers across the truck's dashboard that night and did the math. Transfer fees and taxes would take $1,500. A one-way ticket to Charleston would cost another $400. She'd arrive in West Virginia with maybe $1,000, no plan, and a building that looked like it might collapse if she breathed on it too hard. Worst plan she'd ever had, which is probably why she booked the flight. She called David first, told him she was going away for a while, maybe a few months. He was surprisingly calm about it, his voice carrying that careful neutrality he'd perfected during the divorce. Lily will be disappointed. His pause felt weighted, but honestly, Claire, maybe some time away will help you figure things out. She wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't need to fly halfway across the country to figure anything out. But he wasn't wrong. Everything she'd tried in Maine had failed. Maybe distance would give her perspective. Maybe starting over, somewhere completely new, would break whatever pattern had been slowly destroying her life for the past year. She waited until 2 days before the flight to tell Lily. They met at the diner, their old spot, with the cracked vinyl booths and the waitress who knew Lily liked extra whipped cream on her hot chocolate. 12 years old now, dark hair like David's, Claire's green eyes, questions that cut straight to the heart of things. Claire explained it as carefully as she could, watching her daughter push blueberries around her plate with studied concentration. It's just temporary. A few months, maybe. I want a house and a raffle. I know it sounds crazy, but it needs work. I'm going to fix it up, probably sell it, use the money to get back on my feet. Lily's fork stopped moving. She looked up, and the expression on her face was too old for 12. You want a house in West Virginia, and you're just going to go live there? Not live there. Fix it up, make it worth something. That sounds made up, Mom. I know it does. Silence stretched between them. The diner sounds felt too loud. Dishes clattering, conversations at other tables, the hiss of the coffee maker. Lily stirred her hot chocolate, the spoon clinking against ceramic. Are you running away? The question hit like a physical blow. Claire wanted to say no, wanted to promise she wasn't abandoning her daughter. But the truth was more complicated than simple denial. Maybe a little. Her throat felt tight. But I'm also trying to run towards something. Does that make sense, Wayne? Not really. Claire reached across the table, taking Lily's hand. Her daughter's fingers felt small and cold. I love you, Lily. That doesn't change no matter where I am. And I'm going to call every week, okay? When I get things sorted out, maybe you can come visit. Lily pulled her hand back. Not angry exactly, just distant. Just don't forget about me. Never. Claire's voice cracked. Not possible. But Lily's expression said what she didn't speak aloud. You always say you'll fix things. You never do. The flight from Boston to Charleston felt endless. Claire slept in fragments, waking every time the plane hit turbulence. She'd never been good with flying, never been good with change. She preferred the steady rhythm of her work, sanding wood until the grain emerged clean and honest, measuring cuts with precision, fitting pieces together with the kind of certainty that made sense. Life made sense when you could hold it in your hands and shape it into something beautiful. But there was no precision in what she was doing now. This was faith or stupidity or desperation. Probably all three tangled together into something that felt like free to fall. She landed in Charleston on a November morning that smelled like coal smoke and coming rain. The rental car was the cheapest she could find, a compact that shuddered when the wind gusted. She drove south into the mountains, watching the landscape shift from city to suburbs, to small towns, to nothing but forested ridges that rolled away in every direction. Hollow Creek appeared on the GPS just after noon. The sign at the town limit said population 180, though Claire suspected that number was generous. One main street, a post office that doubled as a general store, a church with paint peeling from its steeple, abandoned company houses with broken windows and sagging porches, and at the far end, a tavern with a weathered sign that read Miner's Rest. Claire parked in front of the tavern and sat for a moment, gathering herself. The property was another 15 miles up a mountain road, according to the directions. She needed supplies, food, basic tools, a sleeping bag. But first she wanted to get a sense of the place. Small towns had long memories. If there was anything to know about Thornwood Cabin, someone here would know it. The tavern was dim and warm, smelling of wood smoke and old beer. A handful of locals sat at the bar, and they all turned to look when Claire walked in. She nodded, trying for friendly but not intrusive, and took a seat at the far end. The bartender was an older man, 70 at least, with a face like weathered granite and a flannel shirt that had seen better decades. He wiped down the bar in front of her without a word, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Beer, whatever's local. He poured in silence and set the glass down. Dark amber, good head. Claire paid and took a long drink. It was excellent, smooth with a faint sweetness that spoke of local honey. Passing through? Not exactly. Claire set the glass down carefully. I'm the new owner of Thornwood Cabin, up the mountain road about 15 miles. The temperature in the room dropped. The locals at the bar exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that happens in places where everyone knows everyone else's business going back 3 generations. The bartender's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. That's so, not a question, a statement that somehow felt like a warning. Bought it sight unseen. Claire tried to keep her voice casual. Well, won it, raffle. I know it needs work, needs more than work. One of the locals muttered it just loud enough to carry. The bartender shot the man a look, then turned back to Claire. Name's Russell Blackwell. Folks call me Russ. Been running this place 40 years, and I'll tell you the same thing I'd tell anyone fool enough to take that property. His voice dropped lower. Nobody's lived there since the war. Nobody should. Claire felt unease prickle down her spine. Why is that? Russ leaned on the bar, studying her with eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by outsiders asking questions. It's not my place to fill your head with old stories, but that house has been empty a long time for a reason. You'd do well to leave it that way. I appreciate the advice. Claire met his gaze steadily. But I've come a long way. I'd like to at least see what I've got. Russ studied her for another long moment, then shrugged. Your choice. Road's rough this time of year. Mind the mud. Claire bought supplies at the general store. Canned soup, bread, bottled water, a camp stove, batteries, matches. The woman behind the counter was polite but distant, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. When Claire mentioned the cabin, the woman just nodded and bagged the items a little faster, as if proximity to someone connected to Thornwood might be contagious. The drive out of Hollow Creek felt longer than 15 miles. The road narrowed from 2 lanes to gravel to rutted dirt that barely qualified as a road at all. Trees pressed close on both sides, old-growth forest that blocked out most of the afternoon light. The few houses she passed were set far back from the road, curtains drawn, no signs of life except occasional smoke from chimneys. And then she saw it. Thornwood cabins sat on a low rise, surrounded by forest so dense it felt like the trees were waiting to reclaim what had been stolen from them decades ago. Stone foundation, log walls gone dark with age and weather. The tin roof had collapsed in the center, leaving a gaping hole that let the sky bleed through. Windows empty as eye sockets. The whole structure tilted slightly to one side, as if it had grown tired of standing and was slowly settling into the earth. Claire parked and got out slowly. The wind was constant up here, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of rain and leaf rot. The silence was profound. No birds, no distant traffic, nothing but wind moving through bare branches and the creak of settling timber. She walked up to the front door. It hung crooked on rusted hinges, the wood swollen and warped but still intact after all these years. The porch beneath her feet groaned with each step, boards flexing dangerously. She pushed the door open and it swung inward with a groan that echoed through empty rooms. Claire stood on the threshold and looked into the darkness. This was it. This was what she'd gambled everything on. A ruin in the middle of nowhere, empty and cold and full of shadows that seemed to move in her peripheral vision. She thought of Lily, the look in her daughter's eyes when she'd asked if Claire was running away. She thought of the apartment she'd lost, the business that had failed, all the ways she'd let life slip through her fingers like water. And then she thought maybe that was the point. Maybe you had to lose everything before you could build something new. Maybe you had to hit bottom before you understood which direction was up. She stepped inside. The first night she slept in the car with the doors locked, parked just outside the property line. Through the windshield, she could see the dark shape of the house against the stars, its broken roof like a mouth opened in a silent scream. She told herself it was practical. The house wasn't safe yet. She needed to survey it properly in daylight, make a plan before she started work. But the truth was simpler and more visceral. The house unnerved her. Even from a distance, even empty and clearly abandoned, it felt like it was watching, waiting. Morning came cold and gray, mist rolling across the clearing like something alive and searching. Claire woke stiff and sore, her breath fogging in the car. She ate a protein bar and drank lukewarm coffee from a thermos, then gathered her nerve and approached the house in full daylight. It looked no better in the morning. If anything, the damage was more apparent. The stonework itself was solid. These walls had stood for over a century, and would stand for another if someone cared enough to maintain them. But everything else was falling apart. The roof timbers were rotten where they hadn't collapsed entirely. The floors sagged and groaned underfoot. In the kitchen, the ceiling had given way completely, leaving a pile of debris and a view straight through to the gray sky above. Claire moved carefully through the rooms, testing each floorboard before committing her weight. The layout was simple: main room with a massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall. Kitchen off to one side, though calling it a kitchen was generous. More like a space where cooking had once happened. Two smaller rooms that might have been bedrooms. And in the far corner of the kitchen, barely visible under collapsed plaster and broken timber, a narrow entrance that led down. She cleared the debris slowly, careful not to bring more of the ceiling down on her head. The door beneath was heavy oak, swollen tight in its frame, but it gave way when she put her shoulder into it. Stairs descended into darkness, steep and narrow. Claire clicked on her flashlight and went down. The cellar was surprisingly intact. Stone walls, dry to the touch. Dirt floor. The air was cool but not damp, which meant the foundation was doing its job even after all these years. It was a single room, maybe 12 by 12, with rough shelving along one wall. Someone had used this space for storage. She could see the rotted remains of wooden crates, a few glass jars still sealed but filled with dark, unidentifiable contents. But what drew her attention was the far corner. A wooden box sat there about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in what looked like oilcloth. The cloth was stained and brittle, but it had done its job. When Claire lifted the box, it felt dry, protected. She carried it back up to the main room where the light was better and set it on the stone floor near the fireplace. Her hands were shaking slightly as she unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside was a leather journal bound with a strap that had rotted away to fragments. The cover was water-stained at the edges, but mostly intact. Claire opened it carefully. The first page was written in neat slanted handwriting. The ink faded to brown but still legible. This journal belongs to Margaret Thornton. If found, please return to Sarah Thornton, 14 Elm Street, Charleston, West Virginia. April 1943. Claire's heart was beating faster now. She turned the page. April 15th, 1943. I arrived at the cabin today. It is more remote than I imagined, which is both frightening and a relief. No one will find me here. I think no one even knows this place exists anymore. She read on, sitting cross-legged on the cold floor, the journal open in her lap. The entries started sparse and factual. Margaret described the cabin, the surrounding forest, the difficulty of the journey from Charleston. She wrote about rationing, about the war, about the fear that followed her even here, miles from anywhere. But she never explained what she was running from. Not in the first entries. By May, the tone had shifted. The writing became more personal, more raw. May 18th, 1943. I felt him move today. Just a flutter, like a bird's wing against the inside of my ribs. I placed my hand there and held very still. He moved again. My son. I know it's a son somehow. I can feel it. He will be strong. He will be safe. That's all that matters now. Claire sat back, the journal trembling in her hands. Margaret had been pregnant, alone in this cabin, pregnant and hiding from someone or something. She kept reading. The entries through summer were a mixture of practical survival notes and quiet observations about pregnancy. Margaret wrote about foraging for food, about gathering firewood, about maintaining the cabin through the hot months. And she wrote about the baby, talking to him, singing to him, making plans for a future she clearly wasn't sure she'd have. June 22nd, 1943. I've been here 2 months. Sometimes I forget why I came. I wake in the morning and, for a moment, I think I'm still in Charleston, still in that apartment, still waiting for him to come home. Then I remember. I remember the look in his eyes the last time. I remember the blood on my lip, the way my ribs ached for weeks after. I remember thinking if I stay, he will kill me. If I stay, he will kill our child. So I left. Sarah helped me. Dear brave Sarah, who risked everything to get me out. I pray she's safe. I pray he hasn't turned his rage on her. Claire's throat tightened. This wasn't an abstract historical document. This was a real woman's life, immediate and desperate and terrifyingly real. By autumn, the entries became shorter, more focused on survival. October 3rd, 1943. First frost last night. The cabin is cold. I've sealed the bedroom as best I can, moved the mattress close to the fireplace in the main room. I worry about winter, about labor, about what happens if something goes wrong and there's no one here to help. November 12th, 1943. A man came to the village, Russ said, asking about a woman alone. Dark hair, from Charleston. Russ lied for me. Said no one like that around here. But I'm frightened. How did he find me this far? How did he know to look here? Claire thought of Russ at the tavern, his weathered face and careful words. He'd known about this. He'd known about Margaret. The winter entries were sparse. Margaret was clearly struggling, cold, isolated, in the final months of pregnancy, December 30th, 1943. I haven't written in weeks, too cold, too tired. But I want to mark this. If something happens to me, I want someone to know I'm not sorry. Even cold and alone and frightened, I'm not sorry I ran. I'd rather die free in this mountain cabin than live one more day under his fists. My son will never know that fear. Even if he never knows me, he will never know that fear. Claire had to stop reading. She set the journal down and walked to the window, staring out at the gray forest. She'd come here thinking this was just a ruin, just a lucky break that might give her a fresh start. But this cabin had a story. It had witnessed something that mattered. She picked up the journal again. The next entry was dated 3 weeks later. January 22nd, 1944. He's here. Tommy, I named him for my father who would have loved him. Born 3 days ago in the bedroom, just me and the winter wind. I thought I would die. I thought we both would, but we didn't. He's small but strong, dark hair like mine. He cries so rarely. It frightens me, that silence. But the midwife books say some babies are just quiet. I hope it's that. I hope it's not that he's learned already to make no sound. Claire's hands trembled as she turned to the pages. The entries after Tommy's birth were different, softer, more hopeful. Margaret wrote about nursing him, about watching him grow, about the small joys of motherhood even in desperate circumstances. March 5th, 1944. Tommy smiled today. A real smile, not gas. He looked right at me and smiled, and I wept. I've been alone so long, and now I'm not. Now I have him. Whatever happens, I have him. Spring brought more entries, detailed accounts of raising a baby in isolation. Margaret wrote about teaching him to be quiet, about the fear that someone might hear him cry and come investigating. She wrote about loving him so fiercely it hurt, and then abruptly the tone changed. June 14th, 1944. He knows. I don't know how, but he knows where I am. Sarah sent word through a contact in the village. Daniel has been asking questions, tracing my steps. He's methodical. He won't give up. I'm trapped here. If I run with Tommy, he'll find us on the road. If I stay, he'll come eventually. Either way, I'm out of time. The next few entries were increasingly frantic. Plans to hide, to fight back, to protect Tommy, no matter what. Contingency after contingency, each one more desperate than the last. July 3rd, 1944. I've carved our names in the stone beside the fireplace. If something happens to me, at least there will be proof we existed. At least someone will know we were here. Claire looked up sharply. She'd been so focused on the journal she hadn't really examined the fireplace. She stood and walked over, running her hands across the stone. And there they were. Names carved into the rock, deep and deliberate. Margaret Thornton, 1944. Below that, smaller and harder to read, other initials. ST, which must be Sarah. DT, which must be Daniel. Fragments of dates going back years. Margaret had made sure she'd be remembered. Even if everything else was lost, these names would remain. Claire pulled out her phone and took photos. Then she returned to the journal, turning to the final entry. Her breath caught as she read it. August 8th, 1944. It's late. Tommy is asleep in the cellar where I've made a hiding place for him, and I heard a car on the mountain road an hour ago. It could be nothing. It could be someone from the village. But I don't think so. I can feel it. After all these months of waiting, he's finally found me. I can hear. The sentence ended there, just stopped mid-word, the pen trailing off into a smudge of ink. Margaret had heard something. Someone. And she'd stopped writing, put down the pen, and gone to face whatever was coming. And she'd never come back to finish the sentence. Claire closed the journal carefully and sat in the empty cabin as the light faded outside. Somewhere in this place, Margaret Thornton had lived and loved and fought to protect her son. Somewhere in this silence, her story had ended. But how? And where was Tommy now? She looked at the carved names on the wall again. Margaret had wanted to be remembered. She'd made sure of that. But remembering wasn't enough. Not anymore. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay in the car with the journal on the passenger seat, staring at the dark shape of the cabin. Every creak of wind, every settling sound made her tense. At some point past midnight, she heard something. Footsteps, light and quick, like a child running. They came from inside the house, from the upper rooms where the floor had collapsed. She sat up, heart pounding, and stared at the broken windows. Nothing moved. No lights, no shadows. Just the empty shell of the cabin under a cold moon. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. That somewhere in those ruined rooms, someone was listening, waiting to see what she would do next. She reached for the journal and held it against her chest like a promise. I don't know what happened to you, Margaret. Her voice barely a whisper in the darkness. But I'm going to find out. Morning came with rain, a steady drizzle that turned the clearing to mud and made the cabin look even more forlorn. Claire woke with Margaret's words still echoing in her mind. She'd read the journal 3 times before finally falling asleep just before dawn, and each reading had raised more questions than it answered. She needed to know what had happened, but more than that, she needed to do something productive with her hands. Sitting still had never been her strength, and grief, even grief for a stranger 70 years dead, demanded action. She drove back to Hollow Creek and bought basic supplies. Tarps to cover the holes in the roof, plywood and nails, a hammer, a saw, work gloves. The woman at the general store watched her load everything into the rental car without comment. Working on the old place? Trying to make it livable. Claire handed over cash, at least weather-tight for now. The woman nodded slowly. You planning to stay then? Long term? I don't know yet. Depends on a lot of things. The woman's expression was unreadable. Well, mind yourself up there. Back at the cabin, Claire started with the most urgent repairs. She climbed carefully onto what remained of the roof and spread tarps over the largest holes, weighing them down with stones. It wouldn't survive a real storm, but it would keep the worst of the rain out for now. Then she moved to the windows, boarding up the ground floor openings to keep wind and weather from destroying what was left inside. She worked steadily through the morning, and the physical labor felt good. Familiar. She'd always thought better with her hands busy, and right now she needed to think. Between tasks, she explored the cellar more carefully, the hiding place Margaret had mentioned in her final entry. Where was it? Claire moved along the walls, tapping stones, looking for hollow spaces. And there, in the far corner behind the shelving, she found it. A section of wall that wasn't quite flush with the rest. She pulled away the rotted shelving and saw what Margaret had created. A small alcove, maybe 3 feet deep and 4 feet wide, hidden behind loose stones that could be pulled away and replaced from inside. Big enough for a toddler to hide in, small enough to be invisible if you didn't know where to look. Claire crouched down and looked into the space. It was empty now, but she could imagine it. Margaret putting Tommy inside, telling him to be quiet no matter what he heard, pulling the stones back into place, protecting her son the only way she knew how. Behind the loose stones, Claire's fingers touched something solid. She pulled it out carefully. A small wooden horse, carved from walnut, no bigger than her palm. The craftsmanship was crude, the proportions off, the legs uneven. But someone had put care into it. The mane had been carved with tiny, careful cuts. The eyes were just indentations, but they gave the horse a gentle expression. There were teeth marks on one ear, the kind a teething baby would make. Tommy's toy. Margaret had made it for him, carving it by hand with whatever tools she had. A mother's gift to her son. Claire sat on the cellar floor with the wooden horse in her palm and felt tears sting her eyes. It was such a small thing, such a simple act of love. But it represented everything. A woman alone, trying to give her child something to play with, something to bring comfort in the darkness and fear. What had happened to Tommy? Where was he now? She was about to climb back upstairs when she noticed something else, Scratches on the wall behind where the toy had been hidden. Faint lines, barely visible. She angled her flashlight and saw them clearly. Tally marks, 5 vertical lines, 1 horizontal across them. The universal symbol for counting. She counted them. 34 sets, 170 days. Margaret had been counting. But counting what? Days since she arrived? Days since Tommy was born? Days since she'd last heard from Sarah? Claire took photos and added them to the growing collection on her phone. Every detail mattered. Every piece of evidence brought her closer to understanding what had happened here. That evening, as she worked to clear debris from the main room, she found it. The chimney had a cavity where stones had come loose, exposing a gap behind. Tucked into that gap, protected from moisture, was another bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Claire pulled it out carefully and unwrapped it in the fading light. Inside was a photograph. The image was damaged. Someone had tried to tear it, the edges ragged, faces scratched and scored. But enough remained to see 2 figures. A young woman holding a small child, maybe 2 years old. The woman wore a simple cotton dress, her dark hair pulled back. The child had chubby cheeks and a solemn expression. One small hand gripping the woman's collar. They stood in front of a stone wall. This wall, Claire realized. The same fireplace where the names were carved. She turned the photograph over. Written in faded pencil, barely legible, Summer 1946. Claire's hands went numb. She stared at those numbers, her mind racing. Summer 1946, 2 years after the journal's final entry. 2 years after Margaret had written about hearing someone coming, and the sentence had ended in that terrible unfinished smudge. Margaret had survived. Whatever happened in August 1944, she'd survived it. She'd lived here with Tommy for at least 2 more years. But then what? And why had someone tried to destroy this photograph, scratching at their faces like they could erase the evidence of their existence? Claire sat on the floor of the ruined cabin as darkness fell outside, holding a photograph that rewrote everything she thought she knew. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the tarps overhead, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called. The wind moved through the trees with a sound like breathing. She pulled out her phone, 1 bar of signal, barely, enough to send a text. The message to Lily was simple. I found something here, a story about someone who lived here a long time ago. I want to know how it ends. The response came 20 minutes later, while Claire was setting up her sleeping bag near the fireplace. That's weird, Mom. Then after a pause, but okay, it wasn't much, but it was something. A crack in the wall Lily had built between them. Claire looked at the carved names one more time. Margaret Thornton, 1944. She'd made sure to leave a mark. She'd known she might disappear, and she'd wanted proof that she existed. I see you, Margaret. Claire's voice was quiet in the empty room. I know you were here, and I'm going to find out what happened to you. The cabin settled around her with a familiar creak. Outside, the forest was dark and vast and full of secrets. But inside, by the fire, Claire had managed to coax to life in the old stone fireplace. There was light. There was warmth. There was the beginning of something that felt like purpose. Tomorrow she'd search for Tommy. If Margaret survived until 1946, the baby would be in his 80s now. Old, but possibly still alive. Possibly still waiting for someone to tell him his mother's story. Claire lay down in her sleeping bag and closed her eyes. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of footsteps in the dark and a woman's voice singing a lullaby she'd never heard before. The Hollow Creek Public Library occupied an old schoolhouse on the edge of town, its brick facade weathered by decades of mountain winters. Claire pushed through the heavy door on her 4th morning in West Virginia, carrying the journal in her backpack and a list of questions that had kept her awake most of the night. The librarian looked up from behind a desk stacked with returned books. Dorothy Hayes, according to the nameplate, mid-60s, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of woman who probably knew every family tree in the county, going back 5 generations. Morning, I'm researching a property I recently acquired. Thornwood Cabin, about 15 miles up the mountain road, Mrs. Hayes's expression shifted. Something between curiosity and caution. You're the one who won it in that raffle. Word travels fast in small towns. What kind of research are you looking for? Property records, historical documents, anything about the Thornton family who owned it. Mrs. Hayes disappeared into a back room and returned 20 minutes later with a thick binder of photocopied documents. Census records, property transfers, birth and death certificates for the area going back to 1880. Here, she pointed to a property record from 1890. Thornton family owned that land since before the turn of the century. Coal miners mostly worked the seams up in those mountains. But look here. Her finger moved to a transfer dated April 1946. Property transferred from Thornton Family Trust to Muriel Dawson. Who was Muriel Dawson? Local woman? Never married? Lived in the village until she died a few years back. She's the one who left the property to the Historical Society. Did she know the Thorntons? Mrs. Hayes shrugged. I couldn't say for certain. But if she took ownership in 1946, right around when Margaret Thornton disappeared, that's interesting timing. Claire's pulse quickened. You know about Margaret? Everyone over a certain age knows the story. Woman who ran off from her husband during the war, hid out somewhere in the mountains. Some say she died up there. Some say she made it out and started over somewhere else. Her voice dropped. But I've never seen any records to prove either way. Is there any way to search death records? For Margaret Thornton, around 1946? Mrs. Hayes helped her search through the archives for the next 2 hours. Birth records, death records, marriage records going back to 1900. They found Margaret's marriage certificate from 1940. Margaret Ann Thornton, age 21, married to Daniel James Thornton, age 28, Charleston, West Virginia. But no death certificate. No birth certificate for a child named Thomas or Tommy Thornton. It was as if Margaret and her son had simply vanished. When Claire returned to the cabin that afternoon, her phone buzzed with an unexpected call. David's name on the screen made her stomach clench. His voice was careful, measured. Lily wants to see you. She's been difficult since you left. Maybe a week together would help. Claire's throat went tight. You're sending her here? She asked. Multiple times, Sarah and I talked about it, and we think maybe it would be good for both of you. The cabin isn't really safe yet, David. I'm still working on basic repairs. Then maybe you can stay somewhere else for the week. There's got to be a motel nearby. Silence stretched between them. Claire looked around at the half-repaired cabin, the tarps overhead, the sleeping bag by the fireplace. When? This weekend. I'll put her on a flight to Charleston Friday morning. You can pick her up at noon. After they hung up, Claire sat on the porch steps and tried to imagine Lily here. Her daughter seeing this place, this wreck of a building in the middle of nowhere. All the ways Claire had failed made visible in concrete. But another part of her, smaller, more desperate, thought maybe this was a chance. Maybe seeing Margaret's story would help Lily understand why Claire had come here. Why some things were worth fighting for even when they seemed impossible. Friday came faster than Claire was ready for. She drove the 2 hours to Charleston, stomach churning with anxiety. Lily emerged from the terminal, looking older than 12, her backpack slung over one shoulder, expression carefully neutral. They drove in silence for the first 20 minutes. Lily stared out the window at the passing landscape. Charleston's urban sprawl giving way to small towns, then to forested mountains that rolled away in every direction. How bad is it? Lily's voice was flat. The cabin. Pretty bad. Claire kept her eyes on the road. But I'm making progress. Mom, this is crazy. You know that, right? Maybe. Lily turned to look at her. You left me for this, for some falling down shack in West Virginia. Dad says you're having some kind of breakdown. Your dad doesn't know everything. He knows you're living in your car and working on a building that's probably going to collapse on you. Claire's hands tightened on the wheel. I'm not having a breakdown. I'm trying to figure out what comes next. There's a difference. By running away? The question hung between them like an accusation. Claire didn't have a good answer because Lily wasn't entirely wrong. They drove the rest of the way in tense silence. When they pulled up to Thornwood, Lily's expression shifted from skepticism to something closer to shock. This is it? Her voice went up half an octave. Mom, this isn't a cabin. This is a disaster. I know it looks rough, but the bones are solid. The foundation is sound. The fireplace works. I've got the roof mostly weatherproof. Lily was already out of the car, walking toward the structure with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for car accidents. She climbed the porch steps carefully, testing each board. Inside, she stood in the main room and turned in a slow circle. The boarded windows, The water-stained walls, the sleeping bag by the fireplace that made it clear where Claire had been living. "You've been sleeping on the floor? It's actually pretty comfortable once you get used to it." Lily's eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. "You left me for this." Claire pulled the journal from her backpack and held it out. "Read this. Then tell me if you still think I'm wasting my time. What is it? Someone's story? Someone who lived here a long time ago and needed people to remember she existed?" Lily took the journal reluctantly and sat down on the cleanest section of floor. Claire went outside to give her privacy, busying herself with repairs to the porch railing while her daughter read about Margaret Thornton's desperate flight from violence. 2 hours passed before Lily emerged. Her face was blotchy from crying. She was pregnant, running from her husband. Her voice cracked. She had the baby here all alone. His name was Tommy. What happened to them? That's what I'm trying to find out. Lily looked back at the cabin, seeing it differently now. This is where she lived, where she hid, for at least 2 years, maybe longer. The anger in Lily's expression had shifted to something more complicated. "Okay, it's really sad, but she died 70 years ago. Why do you care so much?" Claire met her daughter's eyes. "Because I need to prove to myself I can finish something that matters, that I'm not just running away from hard things." Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then quietly, "Can I help?" That evening they sat by the fireplace together, Lily asking questions about Margaret while Claire showed her the carved names, the hiding place in the cellar, the wooden toy horse. By the time they unrolled sleeping bags side by side, something between them had shifted. Not healed exactly, but the wall was developing cracks. The next morning they walked into Hollow Creek together. Claire wanted to talk to Russ again, see if he'd be more forthcoming with a second conversation. The Miners' Rest was quiet at 11 on a Saturday, just two regulars nursing beers at the far end of the bar. Russ looked up when they entered, his weathered face registering something that might have been approval when he saw Lily. "You came back." "I did, and I've been learning about Margaret Thornton." Russ poured coffee without being asked, setting mugs in front of both of them. His movements were deliberate, buying time to decide how much to say. "My father knew her. Not well, but he knew of her, knew she was hiding up there. Your father is the one who found the boy." Russ's expression confirmed it. December 1946. He was checking old mining roads after a storm, heard crying from the cabin, found a little boy in the cellar, maybe 2 or 3 years old, half frozen, nearly dead from cold and hunger. Lily leaned forward, gripping her mug. "What happened to Margaret?" "Never found. My father searched the cabin, searched the grounds. There was blood on the floor. Not bush, but dried, dark. Signs of a struggle, maybe, but no body, no Margaret." "Did he call the police?" "He did. Sheriff came from Charleston, looked around, took the child, filed a report about a missing woman." "And then?" Russ's jaw tightened. 3 days later, a man showed up. Well-dressed, from Charleston, said he was Margaret's husband, the legal father. Had documentation, marriage certificate. Sheriff released the boy to him. Daniel Thornton, that'd be the name. My father said it wasn't right. The boy screamed when the man picked him up, fought like a wild animal. But what could anyone do? The law was on his side. So Daniel just took him? For a time. Russ refilled his coffee, his movements slower now, weighted with old anger. But 2 weeks later, something strange happened. The boy was adopted by a family from Parkersburg, Morrison family, kind people by all accounts. They'd lost their own son in the war, wanted to give a home to an orphan. How did that happen if Daniel had custody? Russ shook his head. My father always wondered, thought maybe the priest got involved. Father Michael's from the church here. He was the kind of man who'd stand up to anyone if he thought it was right. Might have threatened to expose what Daniel had done if he didn't give up the boy. Lily's voice was small. Do you know what happened to him? The boy? Russ's expression softened slightly. Morrison family moved to Ohio in the 50s. Lost track after that. But I've got a cousin up near Cleveland. Works in healthcare. Mentioned once there was an old man in her facility, said he was adopted after the war, came from West Virginia originally. Name was Morrison. Claire's heart hammered. Thomas Morrison? Could be. My cousin's name is Janet, works at Evergreen Senior Living in Lakewood. You want? I could give her a call. Please, Russ. Russ made the call from the office and back. When he returned, his expression was unreadable. Janet remembers him. Thomas Morrison goes by Tommy, 80 years old, sharp as a tack. Widower moved into the facility after his wife passed a few years back. He's there now. Claire's hands were shaking. Can I have the number? Russ wrote it down on a napkin. Fair warning, Janet says he doesn't usually take calls from strangers. Keeps to himself mostly. Claire called from the tavern's parking lot, Lily standing close enough to hear. A nurse answered, professional and cautious. I'm calling for Thomas Morrison. My name is Claire Morgan. I recently acquired property in West Virginia, where I believe his biological mother lived during the 1940s. I found her journal. Long pause. Then, hold please. The wait felt endless. Then a man's voice, elderly but strong. This is Tommy Morrison. Mr. Morrison, my name is Claire. I'm calling from West Virginia. I found a journal written by Margaret Thornton in 1943 and 1944. From Thornwood Cabin in the mountains near Hollow Creek. Silence on the other end, then barely audible. How did you find it? It was hidden in the cellar, wrapped in oilcloth, protected. I've been trying to piece together what happened to her. His breathing was unsteady. I've dreamed about that cabin my whole life, never knew why. The Morrison family, my adoptive parents, they told me I was found there. But I have no memories, nothing. I'd like to meet you, show you the journal, the photographs, help you understand who your mother was. Another long pause. When do you want to come? Is tomorrow too soon? Tomorrow's perfect. They drove 4 hours to Cleveland the next morning, Lily mostly quiet but alert, watching the landscape change from mountains to rolling hills to flat Ohio farmland. The nursing facility was modern and well-maintained, set among gardens that would be beautiful in spring, but looked dormant now in late November. Tommy Morrison waited for them in a common room with large windows overlooking a pond. He was smaller than Claire expected, white hair neatly combed, walking stick propped against his chair. His eyes were sharp and seen and searching. Claire set the journal on the table between them, along with the wooden horse and the photograph she'd found. Tommy's hands shook as he reached for the 1946 photograph. That's her. His voice broke. That's my mother. I've never seen her face before. Lily moved closer, her own eyes wet. Claire opened the journal to March 5th, 1944, the entry about Tommy's first smile. Tommy read it aloud, his voice barely steady. Tommy smiled today. A real smile, not gas. He looked right at me and smiled, and I wept. I've been alone so long, and now I'm not. Now I have him. Whatever happens, I have him. He closed the journal carefully and sat back, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. I've lived 80 years not knowing what she looked like, not knowing if she loved me. And here it is, proof she did, proof she gave up everything for me. Claire showed him more entries, the one about his birth, the passages about teaching him to be quiet, about carving the toy horse, about loving him so fiercely in the midst of fear and isolation. Mr. Morrison, Tommy, please, Tommy. Claire leaned forward. Do you remember anything about that time? His expression became distant. For most of my life, nothing. The psychologist I saw as a child said I blocked it out. Trauma response. But lately, about 6 months ago, I started having dreams. What kind of dreams? Being in a dark place. Someone telling me to stay quiet no matter what I heard. Heavy boots on the floor above me. A man's voice angry. A woman trying to calm him down. Then a sound like something falling. The hiding place in the cellar. Tommy nodded. I stayed there for so long. I was so hungry, so cold. But she'd told me to be quiet, so I stayed quiet. His hands clenched. In the dreams, she keeps saying something. The same thing every time. What does she say? I'm still here. I'm still at Thornwood. Find me. Claire felt ice in her veins. You think she's still there? Her body. Tommy met her eyes. Don't you? Lily's voice was small. We have to look for her. We have to bring her home. They spent another 2 hours with Tommy, showing him everything Claire had found. He told them about his life, the Morrison family who'd raised him with love, his career teaching high school English, his wife Ellen who'd died of cancer 3 years prior, his 3 children and 7 grandchildren. A good life, built on the foundation of a mother's sacrifice he'd never known about until now. Before they left, Tommy gripped Claire's hand. Will you search for her? Will you try to find her? I promise. The drive back to West Virginia felt different, purposeful. Claire and Lily talked about next steps, making plans together for the first time in months. We need equipment, ground-penetrating radar maybe, something that can show disturbances in the soil. How much does that cost? Claire did rough math in her head. A few hundred to rent, maybe more. I have money. Lily's voice was quiet. Birthday money, allowances I've saved. Almost $400. Honey, I can't take your savings. It's not for you. Lily looked out the window. It's for Margaret. She protected her son. We're protecting her memory. That's what mothers do. They arrived back at Thornwood as the sun was setting, painting the cabin in shades of gold and amber. Claire started a fire while Lily unpacked groceries they'd bought on the drive. They ate canned soup and crackers sitting by the fireplace. And for the first time since the divorce, Claire felt like maybe she was doing something right. That night, Lily asked to sleep in the cabin instead of driving to a motel. They arranged their sleeping bags side by side, and Lily fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Claire lay awake, staring at the carved names on the wall. Margaret Thornton, 1944. Tomorrow she'd start searching in earnest. Tomorrow she'd rent the equipment she needed and scan every inch of the property until she found what Margaret's dreams were telling Tommy to find. She was drifting towards sleep when she heard the engine. A vehicle coming up the mountain road, which was unusual. No one came up here except Claire. She sat up, listening. The engine cut off somewhere close. A car door opened and closed with an expensive thunk. Footsteps on the porch. Claire was on her feet instantly, moving to the door. Through the gaps in the boarded windows, she could see headlights. Expensive headlights, the kind that came on luxury SUVs. A knock, firm, authoritative. She opened the door to find a man standing on her porch. Mid-60s, expensive suit that looked out of place in the mountains. Leather briefcase in one hand. The SUV behind him was a Lincoln Navigator, easily $80,000 new. Ms. Morgan. His voice was smooth, practiced. My name is Gregory Thornton. I believe we need to have a conversation. Claire's stomach dropped. Thornton, he was family. He knew about Margaret. It's late. She kept her voice steady. Whatever you're selling, I'm not interested. I'm not selling anything. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm here to make you a very generous offer. For what? For your silence. For that journal. For you to pack up, leave West Virginia, and forget you ever heard the name Margaret Thornton. Behind Claire, Lily stirred. She sat up, instantly alert to danger. Why would I do that? Gregory reached into his briefcase and pulled out a check. Already made out, already signed, $75,000, more than enough to start over somewhere else. Get your business back on its feet. Secure proper housing for you and your daughter. Claire stared at the check. More money than she'd seen in 2 years. Life-changing money. Freedom. What do I have to do? Leave. Tonight if possible. Sign a non-disclosure agreement. Destroy the journal and any other documents you found. Never contact Thomas Morrison again. Why? Gregory's expression hardened. Because I'm Daniel Thornton's grandson. Because I'm running for state senate, and I cannot have my grandfather exposed as a wife killer. Because some things are better left buried. Your grandfather murdered a woman. Claire's voice was cold. And you want to cover it up. My grandfather died in 1955. There's no one to prosecute. This isn't about justice. There is no justice after 70 years. This is about protecting innocent family members from scandal that serves no purpose. It serves Tommy. It serves Margaret's memory. It serves the truth. Gregory put the check away. Then you're making a serious mistake, Ms. Morgan. I have resources, connections. I can make your life very difficult. Is that a threat? It's a reality. Property title disputes can take years to resolve. Visa status, you're technically a Maine resident living in West Virginia without proper documentation. Child welfare services might have questions about your daughter living in a condemned structure. Lily stood up, moving next to Claire. We're not leaving. Gregory looked at her, then back at Claire. Think carefully. You have until Monday to change your mind. After that, things become considerably more complicated. He walked back to his Lincoln and drove away, expensive engine purring into the night. Claire stood on the porch, shaking with adrenaline and rage. Lily's hand found hers. Mom, he can't actually do those things, can he? Claire thought about the custody hearing, how easily David's lawyers had made her look unstable and unfit, how quickly the system had stripped away her rights because she didn't have the resources to fight back. He can try, then we need to move faster. Lily's voice was fierce. We need to find Margaret before he can stop us. Monday morning, Claire drove to Charleston and rented ground-penetrating radar equipment from a geological survey company. The technician who showed her how to use it looked skeptical when she said she was looking for old foundations. The device rolled across the ground on small wheels, sending electromagnetic pulses into the earth and measuring the reflections. Disturbances in the soil showed up as anomalies on the screen. Changes in density, voids, objects that didn't belong. Claire spent 3 days scanning the property in careful grids, Lily helping her mark off sections and record results. The work was slow and backbreaking, pushing the equipment over uneven ground, trying to interpret the fuzzy images on the screen. On the 4th day, she found it. Behind the cabin, about 30 feet into the forest, the GPR showed a clear anomaly, a disturbance in the soil roughly 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. The edges were distinct, the fill material different density from the surrounding earth. The depth suggested it was relatively shallow, maybe 3 feet down, grave-shaped. Claire marked the spot with stakes and stood back, staring at it. After 70 years, this could be where Margaret Thornton was buried, hidden in the forest she'd loved, unmarked and forgotten. Lily stood beside her, pale but steady. What do we do now? We call the police. We do this the right way. Detective Sarah McKenzie with West Virginia State Police arrived the next day, professional and thorough. She examined the GPR results, walked the site, took photographs. A forensic team was scheduled for the following week, proper excavation with documentation and chain of custody. But 2 days later, a courier delivered an envelope. Court documents. Emergency injunction filed by Gregory Thornton on behalf of the Thornton family descendants, claiming legal interest in any remains found on the property. Excavation was prohibited pending resolution of property rights disputes. Claire called McKenzie immediately. He can't do this. This is a murder investigation. McKenzie's voice was tight with frustration. His lawyers are arguing it's not a murder investigation until we have a body. And we can't get a body without excavating. It's a legal loop, so he just wins? Not necessarily. I'm filing motions to override the injunction on grounds of public interest. But it'll take time. How much time? Weeks, maybe months. That night, Gregory called Claire's cell. She let it go to voicemail. His message was brief and cold. You should have taken my offer, Ms. Morgan. Now things get unpleasant. Expect a visit from Child Protective Services regarding your daughter's living conditions. Also expect questions about your visa status. Turns out you're overstaying permitted time in West Virginia without establishing legal residency. And I've been in touch with your ex-husband. He's concerned about Lily's welfare. Custody arrangements can be revisited quite easily with the right legal pressure. Claire played the message for Lily. Her daughter's face went white. He can take me away from you? He can try. Claire's voice was steadier than she felt. But we're not going to let him. How do we stop him? We find another way. There has to be a legal path around his injunction. McKenzie is working on it, and I'm going to call some people, see if there are advocacy groups that deal with domestic violence cold cases. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm not leaving, Mom. Even if Dad comes here himself, I'm not leaving until we finish this. Margaret protected her son. You're protecting her memory. I'm not going to be the reason you give up. Claire pulled her daughter close, and for the first time in over a year, Lily hugged back fiercely. They stood like that in the half-repaired cabin while the fire crackled and the wind moved through the mountain forest outside. Somewhere beneath that soil, Margaret Thornton waited to be found. And Claire wasn't going to stop searching, no matter how many expensive lawyers Gregory Thornton threw at her. Some promises were worth keeping, even when they cost everything. While Claire argued with lawyers over speakerphone, Lily explored the cabin alone. The chimney bothered her, massive, built from riverstone, dominating the main room. Historic cabins often had hiding places in chimneys, loose stones, cavities behind the flue. She worked carefully, testing stones near the base. About 4 feet up, one section shifted. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of letters. 12 envelopes addressed to Margaret Thornton. Return address: Sarah Thornton, 14 Elm Street, Charleston, West Virginia. Postmarks from May 1943 to March 1944. Lily opened the first one carefully. Dearest Margaret, I pray this letter reaches you. Daniel came to my apartment yesterday looking for you. I told him I hadn't heard from you in months. He didn't believe me. Please be careful. Burn this after you read it. Your loving sister, Sarah. Each letter painted escalating danger. Daniel searching obsessively, using his coal company position to pressure people, hiring investigators, narrowing his search. Then Lily found the 13th envelope. Different paper, newer. The date made her breath catch. August 1946. Margaret, if you're reading this, I'm coming for you. I have proof now. Police report from Charleston about what Daniel did to you in 1942. I'm bringing the sheriff. We're coming to get you and Tommy out safely. Hold on, I'll be there by the 20th. All my love, Sarah. Tucked inside was a photocopy. Charleston Police Department, incident report, November 1942. Domestic disturbance, victim Margaret Thornton. Injuries consistent with severe beating. At the bottom, charges dismissed at victim's request. Coal company applied pressure. Mom. Lily's voice cracked as she ran outside. Mom, you need to see this. Claire read through the letters twice, fury building. Sarah tried to save her. Here she had evidence. She was bringing help, but she was too late. Lily's voice was small. The letter is dated August 1946. Margaret was already gone. We need to find Sarah's family. 4 hours of calls and online searches led them to Linda Watts, 70 years old, Charleston. Sarah Thornton's daughter, Margaret's niece. My mother carried guilt about Aunt Margaret her whole life. Linda's voice broke over the phone. She always believed Daniel killed her. Did she try to prove it? She went to police in 1947, tried to file a homicide report. Linda's bitterness came through clearly. They laughed at her, said Daniel had passed a polygraph. My mother said the fix was in. Daniel's brother worked for state government. The polygraph examiner was a family friend. We have evidence now. Detective Mackenzie is working the case. But Gregory Thornton is blocking everything. Gregory, Linda spat the name. That bastard knows exactly what his grandfather did. He spent his whole career burying it. Can you help us? I'll do whatever it takes. Detective Mackenzie filed a Freedom of Information request that morning. West Virginia State Archives. Any police records related to Margaret Thornton or Daniel Thornton from the 1940s. The response came back within days, 3 digitized files. Claire and Lily drove to the state police barracks. Mackenzie spread documents across her desk. The first file was the missing person report from September 1944, filed by Sarah Thornton. The investigating officer had written, subject's husband states he has not seen his wife in over a year, claims she abandoned him. No evidence of foul play. Case closed. The second file detailed Tommy's discovery in December 1946. Blood found on the cabin floor. Interview with Daniel Thornton. But the handwritten margin notes made Claire's stomach turn. Chief called me into office before Thornton interview. Subject's family connected to governor's office. Keep it quiet. Further down, polygraph administered by Earl Morrison. Thornton family friend, not independent examiner. Results questionable, but Chief says use them anyway. At the bottom, no physical evidence linking subject to scene. Omit witness statement about vehicle. Chief's orders. The third file contained witness statements. Jake Blackwell's account of finding Tommy, but an additional page was marked excluded from official report. Witness observed black 1945 Packard sedan on Mountain Road approximately 200 yards from Thornwood Cabin, evening of December 18, 1946. Vehicle registration traced to Daniel J. Thornton, Charleston, WV. This information omitted from official report per Chief's directive. They knew he was there. Lily's voice shook. They knew, and they covered it up. Mackenzie's jaw tightened. Institutional corruption. The chief of police actively suppressing evidence in a homicide investigation. Can we use this to override Gregory's injunction? I'll file an emergency motion today. That evening, David called. His voice was strained. Claire, I got a call from a lawyer today. Gregory Thornton. He sent photographs of Lily sleeping on the floor of a collapsed building. He's threatening emergency custody modification. Lily grabbed the phone. Dad, listen to me. I'm staying. We found proof that a woman was murdered here and police covered it up. We're trying to bring her home. I'm not leaving until we finish this. Honey, that's not your decision. Yes, it is. I'm 12, not 6. If you try to force me back, I'll tell the judge exactly what's happening. How Mom is fighting for someone who can't fight for herself. How she's finally doing something that matters. Silence, then David's voice quieter. Put your mother on. Claire took the phone. You have 1 week. David's voice was firm. 1 week to resolve this. If you haven't made real progress, Lily comes home and we revisit custody. Understand? I understand. 2 days later, Gregory called Claire's cell. She let it go to voicemail. You should have taken my offer, Ms. Morgan. Expect consequences. Child Protective Services will be calling. So will immigration about your residency status. This was your choice. The break came from unexpected quarters. A Charleston Gazette Mail reporter, following court filings, requested an interview. Claire calculated that public pressure might be their only leverage. The article ran 3 days later. Front page above the fold. State Senate candidate blocks investigation into grandfather's alleged murder. The story was thorough and damning. Margaret's flight from abuse, journal entries documenting her fear, Tommy's discovery, suppressed police evidence, Gregory's legal campaign to prevent excavation, quotes from Linda Watts about her mother's failed attempts at justice, from Russ Blackwell about his father's buried witness statement, from Detective Mackenzie about corruption in the original investigation. The photograph showed Tommy Morrison, 80 years old, holding the wooden horse his mother had carved. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Domestic violence groups picked up the story. Social media erupted. Local news stations requested interviews. Within 48 hours, Gregory Thornton faced uncomfortable questions at every campaign stop. His poll numbers dropped 12 points overnight. The campaign issued a statement. The Thornton family supports a thorough investigation and wants truth and closure for all parties. But the damage was irreversible. Gregory withdrew from the Senate race within the week, citing personal family matters. His law firm announced an extended leave of absence. His lawyer filed a motion withdrawing all objections to the excavation. Mackenzie called with the news. We're clear to proceed. Forensic team scheduled for Monday. Claire's hands shook. After 70 years, they were finally going to bring Margaret home. Tommy Morrison made the drive from Ohio despite his daughter's concerns. He arrived Sunday evening, moving slowly with his walking stick, but his eyes were determined. I need to be there. His voice was firm. When you find her, I need to be there. It might be difficult. Seeing the remains, she's my mother. I've waited 80 years. I can handle difficult. The forensic team arrived at dawn Monday. Dr. Robert Hayes, forensic anthropologist from West Virginia University. Allison Chen, evidence photographer. 2 graduate assistants. Detective Mackenzie overseeing everything. They established a perimeter around the marked site, set up a canopy, photographed undisturbed ground. The process was meticulous. Claire, Lily, and Tommy watched as the team began removing topsoil in careful layers. 2 hours in, Allison called out, I've got something. Dr. Hayes took over, working with brushes and small tools. Fabric emerged, rough cotton, deteriorated but identifiable as a dress. Beneath that, wool, a shawl or a blanket. The excavation continued through morning. By noon, Dr. Hayes had exposed skeletal remains. Adult female positioned on her side, hasty burial. No coffin, just a body wrapped in whatever had been available and hidden in the forest. Tommy moved closer, leaning on his walking stick. Claire stayed beside him. Dr. Hayes worked in silence for another hour, documenting every detail. Then he called Mackenzie over, pointing to the skull. Blunt force trauma to the left temporal bone. Fracture pattern consistent with being struck by a heavy object. Just. He moved to the arms. Defensive fracture to the left ulna. She raised her arm to protect herself. Cause of death? Based on what I'm seeing, blunt force trauma to the head. This was a violent death. Tommy's breathing was uneven. He killed her. After everything. Dr. Hayes continued his examination. Then he paused, brush hovering over something at the skeleton's neck. He worked carefully, revealing a tarnished metal object, locket, heart-shaped. He extracted it with infinite care. The catch was corroded but open when he applied gentle pressure. Inside was a lock of dark baby hair and a tiny photograph, an infant's face. Tommy made a sound like all the air had been punched from his lungs. That's me. She kept me close. Lily was crying openly. Claire had her arm around Tommy, and the old man shook with grief that had waited 8 decades. Dr. Hayes looked up, his professional demeanor cracking. She loved you very much. Even at the end, she made sure you were with her. The excavation continued into afternoon. Every bone documented, photographed, carefully removed and cataloged. Fabric remnants, soil samples, everything that might tell Margaret's story. As the sun set, Dr. Hayes made his preliminary assessment. Adult female, approximately 25 to 30 years of age at death. Cause of death, homicidal violence. Time of death, consistent with burial in the mid-1940s based on fabric deterioration and soil chemistry. We'll need DNA confirmation. He looked at Tommy. Would you be willing to provide a sample? Yes, absolutely yes. The remains were transported to the forensic lab that evening. Claire, Lily, and Tommy sat in the miner's rest while Russ served coffee and the weight of the day settled over them. My father would have been glad to see this. Russ's voice was gruff. He never forgave himself for not doing more. He saved my life. Tommy looked at him. When he found me in that cellar, he saved my life. 3 weeks of waiting. Claire threw herself into cabin repairs. Lily helped between schoolwork via video calls. David had agreed to extend her stay through the DNA results, his opposition softening after reading the newspaper coverage. Tommy returned to Ohio but called every few days. His daughter had started researching Morrison family history, discovering they'd suspected something wrong about Tommy's origins, but never pushed, not wanting to traumatize the child they'd grown to love. Dr. Hayes called on a Tuesday morning. Claire put him on speaker. DNA results are conclusive. The remains are a maternal match to Thomas Morrison. 99.9% certainty she's his mother. Claire felt tears sting her eyes. Thank you. There's more. Age at death was approximately 27 years old. Analysis shows evidence of chronic abuse, multiple rib fractures that heal badly, fractured wrist, facial trauma, all consistent with repeated domestic violence over years. Lily's hand found Claire's, gripping tight. Cause of death confirmed as blunt force trauma to the temporal region. The blow was delivered from behind and above, consistent with victim on the ground, assailant standing over her. Death would have been relatively quick. The isotope analysis shows she spent early life in an urban area, Charleston most likely. The last 2 to 3 years show a shift to rural mountain diet, wild plants, game meat, limited grain. She was struggling to survive, but she was surviving. When will you release the remains? They're released now. I'm sending the full report to Mr. Morrison. He's listed as next of kin, so burial arrangements are his decision. Tommy called within the hour. His voice was thick with emotion. I want to bury her in Hollow Creek, near the cabin where she lived, where I was born. Would that be acceptable? There's a cemetery here. Old one on a hillside. I think she'd like it. Will you help me arrange it? Of course. While they waited for Tommy to arrive and funeral arrangements to be finalized, Lily was cleaning the cellar one last time. She'd become obsessed with documenting everything. Behind a loose brick in the hiding place where Tommy had spent hours alone and terrified, she found a small leather pouch. Inside was a letter, unsealed, paper that had survived, protected by leather and dry cellar air. The handwriting was Margaret's. My dearest Tommy, if you are writing this, I am gone. I pray you never have to, but if you do, know this. Every cold night, every hungry day, every moment of fear was worth it for you. I left everything to give you something I never had. A childhood without fear. A life where you could laugh without worrying someone would hurt you for being happy. I don't regret running. I don't regret hiding. I would do it all again, 1,000 times. Grow up strong, my son. Be kind, be brave, love freely, and know that wherever I am in these mountains I loved, in this cabin where you were born, I am watching over you. You were my greatest joy. You made every sacrifice worth it. All my love, forever and always, Mama. Lily read it 3 times, tears streaming. Then she called Tommy and read it to him over the phone. The sound he made was somewhere between up and laugh. After 80 years, I finally get to hear her voice. What she wanted from me. what I meant to her. She loved you more than anything. I know that now. Thanks to you and your mother, I know that now. The funeral was held on a cold morning in late November, 1 year after Claire first arrived at Thornwood. The Hollow Creek Cemetery sat on a hillside above town, surrounded by old stone walls and trees that had stood for centuries. The Thornton family plot dated back to the 1880s. Coal miners and their wives, generations who'd worked these mountains and been buried in them. A new grave had been prepared. A simple pine coffin waited. Tommy arrived with his daughter and 2 grandchildren. Linda Watts came from Charleston, bringing photographs of Sarah Thornton she thought Margaret would want to be buried with. Russ Blackwell was there, representing his father who'd never stopped feeling guilty. Detective Mackenzie came, along with Dr. Hayes, a handful of locals who'd followed the story. Reporters kept at respectful distance. Claire and Lily had arranged mountain laurel branches around the grave. Margaret had written about the flowers in her journal, how they bloomed wild and beautiful. The local minister spoke about courage and sacrifice and the fierce love of mothers who give everything for their children. Then Tommy spoke. He stood beside the coffin, one hand resting on smooth wood, his voice steady despite tears. "Mama, I'm sorry it took 70 years to bring you home. I'm sorry you spent all that time waiting, forgotten by everyone except the mountains that protected you. But I'm here now, and I want you to know that everything you fought for, it worked. I was safe. I was loved. The Morrison family gave me a beautiful childhood, full of laughter and kindness and all the things you wanted from me. I became a teacher. I had a wife I loved for 50 years. I have children and grandchildren who are good people, kind people. All of that exists because you were brave enough to run, because you loved me more than you feared him. Thank you for my life. Thank you for every sacrifice. I hope you can finally rest." He placed the wooden horse on the coffin before they lowered it into the ground. A gift returned, a circle completed. Claire and Lily threw in handfuls of earth, then stood back as the grave was filled. The headstone was already in place, black granite with simple engraving. Margaret Ann Thornton, 1919 to 1946. Beloved mother, I would rather die free in these mountains than raise my son in a house full of fear. He will know love. That is all that matters. Promise kept. After the service, people gathered at the Miners' Rest. Russ had prepared food. Locals shared stories about the Thornton family, the coal mining days, the hardships and small triumphs of mountain life. Tommy sat with Linda, looking at photographs of Sarah, the sister who tried so hard to save Margaret but arrived too late. Tommy found Claire before he left. "You gave me my mother. After a lifetime of not knowing, you gave me her story, her love, proof that I mattered to someone. I'll never forget that. You deserve to know." So did she. She deserved to be remembered, to have her courage honored instead of buried. That evening, Claire and Lily stood on Thornwood's newly rebuilt porch. The cabin was weather-tight now, the roof solid, windows with glass. Smoke rose from the chimney into the cold December air. Inside, the carved names remained untouched beside the fireplace. Margaret Thornton named for a permanent reminder of who had lived here, who had loved here, who had died protecting what mattered most. "You okay, Mom?" Claire looked at her daughter. 14 months ago, they'd been strangers separated by divorce and disappointment. Now they stood together, bound by something stronger than custody arrangements or court orders. Better than okay. For the first time in my life, I know exactly what matters. Lily leaned against her shoulder. Margaret taught us that. She did. Claire wrapped her arm around her daughter. She taught us that some things are worth fighting for, even when the cost is everything. That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's running anyway. That love means protecting what you cherish, no matter what. They stood in comfortable silence, watching twilight settle over the mountains. Somewhere in the valley below, Margaret Thornton rested at last, her name carved in granite, her story finally told, her son finally knowing the depth of her sacrifice. Next spring, mountain laurel would bloom on her grave. Tommy would visit with his grandchildren, telling them about the grandmother they'd never met. And Thornwood Cabin would stand, no longer abandoned, no longer forgotten, but filled with the warmth and life Margaret had always dreamed her son would have. Some stories wait generations to be told. Some promises take decades to keep. But in the end, truth wins. love wins. And mothers who give everything for their children are finally remembered. Claire felt Lily's hand slip into hers, squeezed back. Together they walked inside where the fire burned bright and the carved names caught the light, and the cabin Margaret had made into a sanctuary became at last a home again, exactly as she would have wanted.